Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this for a second. It's a grainy black and white scene in a 1960s airport terminal. A young man, barely out of his teens, walks in with the absolute swagger of a veteran airline captain. His pilot's uniform is tailored to absolute perfection. He's charming, he's intelligent, and as far as the authorities are concerned, he's basically a ghost. We've all been sold this cinematic, glamorous image of the ultimate con man, right? I mean, Hollywood built a multi-million-dollar empire on this very picture, casting A-list actors to play out his legendary exploits.
But what if the absolute greatest con he ever pulled was the story itself? Let's actually dive into this, because we live in a world where we constantly curate our lives. Sure, but Frank Abagnale Jr. didn't just curate his life, he completely fabricated his reality. Today, we're going to look at the cold, hard public records and the brilliant work of investigative journalists to peel back the layers of a legend you probably thought you knew inside and out.
Part 1. The Hollywood Illusion.
So, according to the legend, which, by the way, was mostly pushed by Abagnale himself, he was this incredible teenage mastermind. He supposedly posed as a pilot, flying millions of miles for free, stepped in as a chief resident pediatrician, and even worked as a lawyer. He claimed to have been hunted across 26 different countries by the FBI, holding the title of the youngest and most daring con man in history. It sounds like the perfect movie plot, doesn't it? Well, maybe, because it was practically designed to be exactly that.
And here comes the ultimate rug pull. We're talking a total reality check. The legend paints him as this suave, globe-trotting teenage mastermind. But the actual public records, they reveal a confused runaway who was just passing bad checks and committing petty larceny. He wasn't charming his way into international cockpits and living like a king for years on end. No, he was constantly on the move, jumping from state to state, always just one desperate step ahead of the law.
Part 2. The real Frank Abagnale.
Let's look at his actual timeline. Born in 1948 in the Bronx to a charismatic but struggling father, his world really crumbled at age 12 with his parents' bitter divorce. By 15, he was already testing the waters of deception. After a brief, entirely unremarkable stint in the U.S. Navy, he was discharged at just 16, and by 1969, he was arrested in France. When you look at these milestones, you don't see a sophisticated villain's origin story, do you? You just see a disjointed youth that escalated from a broken home straight to an international arrest.
Get this, his very first real foray into deception wasn't some grand casino heist. It was exactly $3,400. That's it. This was a small-time scheme where he literally just exploited his dad's gas credit card. He'd buy car parts, have local gas station attendants return them for cash, and then he'd simply pocket the difference. It was a $3,400 lesson in how surprisingly easy it is to exploit cracks in a system built on basic human trust.
Now, if you're still holding on to that image of the suave mastermind, listen to this. At just 16 years old, within weeks of leaving the Navy, he posed as a police officer, brandishing a toy gun, of all things, just to gain access to a neighbor's apartment. He was arrested and actually sent to a psychiatric facility. This wasn't the work of a criminal genius, guys. This was a teenager drifting through a series of increasingly desperate, small-scale offenses.
Part 3. Mechanics of the scam.
But don't get me wrong, he absolutely did commit real crimes and he really did steal money. So, how did his scams actually work? The crucial piece of the puzzle here is understanding a concept called check kiting. Today, our banking is totally instantaneous. But back in the 1960s, banking systems were incredibly sluggish and analog. Check kiting involves creating counterfeit checks, often using really high-quality paper and convincing logos, and exploiting the fact that it took days or even weeks for a check to actually clear between banks. Abagnale wasn't hacking mainframes. He was quite literally just taking advantage of the mail system.
It all worked in 3 devastatingly simple steps. First up, the power of the uniform. Frank figured out pretty quick that people aren't usually looking for fraud. They look for cues of normalcy. By throwing on a pilot's uniform, he gained instant authority. Second, the actual check kiting. He'd deposit those high-quality fakes. And third, the illusion of permanence. He would open accounts and withdraw the cash long before the banks realized the money never actually existed in the first place. By the time that analog system caught up, our fake pilot had already vanished.
Part 4. The true cost.
Okay, I want to slow down for just a second here, because it's super easy to get caught up in the fun, sneaky mechanics of a 1960s scam, but we really have to separate the myth from the reality. These were not victimless crimes. Behind all the glitz and the humor of the Hollywood movie screen, real people had their trust totally betrayed. Every single check that bounced was a direct financial loss for ordinary families, small business owners, and local banks. It was never this harmless game of cat and mouse. It was a string of completely selfish choices that severely damaged hardworking people.
Part 5. The inevitable downfall.
Which brings us to the end of the line for his criminal run. And it's time to completely strip away that illusion of the thrilling, untouchable escape artist. The real investigators? They didn't need high-speed car chases or massive, elaborate sting operations. By 1969, the walls closed in when he was arrested in Montpellier, France. And how was he caught? An old associate simply recognized him from a standard wanted poster. He was tracked down via a very ordinary, mundane paper trail of bad checks, theft, and identity fraud. From there, he was incarcerated in France, then Sweden, and finally deported back to the US to face the music.
His memoirs painted him as the escape artist, this untamable rogue secretly working for the FBI. But the reality? He was just the inmate. In 1971, he was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He didn't work for the FBI as a teenager, and he definitely didn't hold high-level positions in law firms or hospitals for years on end. He was just a man caught in the very ordinary cycle of crime and consequence, serving hard time.
Part 6. The power of narrative.
So if the actual facts are so starkly different from the myth, you kind of have to ask yourself a deeper question. Why did we as a society let this legend go on for so long? Well, Abagnale realized pretty early on that his story was way more valuable than his actual history. He eventually reinvented himself as a security consultant, and it's an incredibly ironic conclusion when you think about it. A man who spent his youth breaking the rules and hurting small businesses eventually built a highly profitable brand out of teaching others how to defend against fraud. He turned a fabricated, exaggerated life into a captivating empire, mostly because we, the public, desperately want to believe in the clever rogue.
And honestly, that brings us to the most important takeaway of this whole explainer. Trust is a vulnerability. Skepticism isn't cynicism, it's a safeguard. When we stop verifying and just assume that someone's uniform, their status, or their effortless charm is absolute proof of their integrity, that's exactly when we create the environment where fraud thrives. Whether we're talking about paper checks in the 1960s or massive digital scams today, a healthy dose of skepticism is what protects us from the illusionists.
The most dangerous illusions are for sure the ones we eagerly convince ourselves are true. The truth is almost never as shiny as the movie version, but it is absolutely always more important. Which really begs the question, if we bought the myth of Frank Abagnale Jr. so easily, what other famous legends are completely made up? If you found this deep dive compelling, hit that subscribe button. We pull back the curtain on the world's most fascinating stories every single week. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you next time.